If you have been following the landscape of conservative media commentary over the past several years, you already know that Tucker Carlson occupies a position unlike almost anyone else in that space. He is not simply a commentator. He is a cultural force, a figure who has built one of the most loyal and most expansive audiences in the history of American political media on the foundation of a very specific style that combines mockery, condescension, and the performance of bewildered disbelief into something his audience finds irresistible. He does not debate his targets. He mocks them. He does not engage with their arguments. He caricatures them. He does not treat the people he disagrees with as opponents worthy of serious engagement. He treats them as punchlines, and he delivers those punchlines with the practiced ease of someone who has never once been made to feel that the punchline might come back at him. When Tucker Carlson decided to mock Jasmine Crockett on his platform, he did it the way he does everything, with complete confidence that the exchange would go exactly the way his exchanges always go. He had the platform, he had the audience, he had the decades of experience, and he had the specific style of dismissiveness that has made him one of the most watched figures in conservative media. What he did not have, what he had clearly not prepared for, was a fact check so instant, so specific, and so completely documented that it did not just answer the mockery. It froze the studio. Before we go any further, if you are new to this channel, subscribe right now and hit the like button. We cover the moments that cut through the noise of the media landscape and reveal something real about what happens when power meets preparation in a public setting. Now let us get into exactly what happened, why Carlson believed the mockery would land the way it always lands, and why the fact check that followed changed everything about the dynamic of that studio. Tucker Carlson has refined his method across decades of television that began long before he became the dominant figure in conservative media that he is today. The method has evolved, but its essential character has remained consistent, a performance of incredulous contempt that positions its targets as either dishonest or stupid, usually both, and that wraps that positioning in enough wit and enough confidence that the performance itself becomes the argument. He does not need to disprove what his targets say. He only needs to make his audience feel that disproving it would be beneath the dignity of serious engagement. The raised eyebrow, the slightly open mouth, the tone of someone who cannot quite believe that a person this foolish is being taken seriously by anyone. These are his instruments, and he plays them with the skill of someone who has been playing them for a very long time. The mockery he directed at Crockett was rooted in a specific claim about her record and her public statements, a characterization that his team had constructed to make her appear to be both hypocritical and uninformed, a figure whose public positioning on a particular issue was directly contradicted by her documented actions in a way that deserved not serious engagement but ridicule. He delivered it in his signature style, the slow buildup of incredulous description, the rhetorical questions that do not expect or want answers, the knowing look at the camera that invites his audience to share in the contempt he is performing. For the portion of his audience that had already made up its mind about Crockett, it landed exactly as designed. The familiar rhythms of Carlson doing what Carlson does produced the familiar response, the comfortable confirmation of a view that had already been held. But Crockett was watching, and Crockett had the documentation. The fact check came with a speed that the studio had not prepared for. This is the detail that everyone who watched the subsequent clip returned to most consistently. Not just that the fact check was accurate, not just that it was specific, but that it arrived so quickly and so completely that it produced the impression not of a response being assembled in real time, but of a response that had been ready before the mockery had finished being delivered. That quality of instantaneous, fully formed, thoroughly documented rebuttal communicated something beyond its specific content. It communicated that the mockery had been anticipated, that the characterization Carlson had built had been seen before it arrived, that the person being mocked had not simply prepared to respond to criticism, but had prepared to respond to this specific criticism, in this specific form, with this specific documentation, before the studio lights had come on. The fact check addressed the central claim of Carlson's mockery with a precision that left no room for the usual escapes. She did not argue about framing. She did not contest the interpretation of his characterization in a way that would have allowed the argument to become a debate about subjectivity. She produced, specifically, and with sourcing that was immediately verifiable, the documented evidence that showed the foundational claim of his mockery to be factually incorrect. Not misleading, not exaggerated, not presented without sufficient context, incorrect. The record showed something different from what Carlson had represented. The dates were wrong, or the sequence was wrong, or the specific vote or statement he had cited as evidence of her hypocrisy did not mean what he had said it meant when placed against the full documented record of what had actually occurred. The studio froze in the specific way that studios freeze when something has happened that the production has not prepared for. Carlson is a controlled television presence. He has been in live and recorded settings long enough that his composure is almost entirely reliable. The kind of composure that comes not from the absence of reaction, but from the practiced management of reaction, the ability to keep the performance moving even when something unexpected has entered the room. But the instantaneous, documented, specific fact check that Crockett had delivered produced a pause that the practiced composure could not entirely absorb without visible processing. The pause was brief, but it was there, and it was the kind of pause that communicates, to anyone watching carefully, that the person pausing did not have an immediate answer for what had just been placed in front of them. What followed the pause was notable for what it was not. It was not an engagement with the specific factual content of the fact check. It was not an acknowledgement that the documentation she had cited created a problem for the claim he had made. It was not the kind of direct response that the fact check had demanded by virtue of its specificity. Instead, Carlson moved, with the smooth professional instinct of a broadcaster who knows how to keep a program moving even when a moment has not gone as planned, toward reframing. He attempted to suggest that the specific fact she had cited was not the point he had been making, that the broader characterization remained valid even if one specific element of the supporting evidence had been presented imprecisely, that the real issue was something adjacent to the specific claim she had corrected. The reframe was well executed as reframes go. Carlson is skilled enough that even his recoveries have a certain quality of authority to them, the sense that he is not retreating but simply clarifying, not conceding but refining. In settings where the original claim has been challenged by something ambiguous or interpretable, that kind of reframe can be effective. It can shift the ground of the exchange in a way that makes the original challenge seem less decisive than it appeared. But the fact check Crockett had delivered was not ambiguous. It was not interpretable in a way that was favorable to Carlson's position. The documentation existed, and it said what she had said it said. The reframe could not change that. What it could do, and what it did, was make visible the specific mechanism of the Carlson method in a way that his platform usually successfully prevents from being visible. The mockery had been built on a factual foundation that turned out to be incorrect. The response to being shown that foundation was incorrect was not to acknowledge the error, but to suggest that the foundation was not really the point. That sequence, claim, fact check, reframe away from the fact check, told a story about how the method operates that Carlson's audience does not usually get to see so clearly, because the method usually does not encounter the kind of instantaneous, specific, documented response that makes the sequence legible. Crockett did not let the reframe stand unchallenged. She returned to the specific documented evidence with the same composure she had maintained throughout, not with escalating emotion, not with the kind of visible frustration that would have given Carlson something to contrast with his own performed calm, but with the steady, factual insistence of someone who understands that the documented record does not become less true because the person it challenges has chosen to discuss something else instead. She made the sequence visible. She noted, specifically and clearly, that the original claim had been factually incorrect, that the documentation demonstrating this was verifiable and available, and that the subsequent pivot to a different framing of the issue did not address the specific error that had been made. The studio remained in the altered state that the initial fact check had produced. The energy that Carlson's mockery had established, the confident, dismissive momentum of a performance proceeding exactly as intended, had not recovered its original character. It had been replaced by something more cautious, more careful, more aware that the exchange was being documented, and that the documentation was not favorable to the position his mockery had staked. The people in that studio who had arrived expecting the familiar dynamic of Carlson deploying his method against a target who would struggle to respond effectively were watching a different dynamic, one in which the target had responded with such speed and such specificity that the method itself had become the subject of the exchange, rather than simply the vehicle for it. The clip moved the moment it was available. The specific quality of what it showed, the mockery, the instant fact check, the freeze, the reframe, the return to the documented evidence, compressed into a sequence that told its complete story in under 2 minutes and did not require extensive political background to understand. You did not need to be familiar with the specific policy matter at issue. You did not need to have followed Carlson's history of these exchanges or Crockett's record of responding to them. You needed only to watch the sequence, the confidence of the mockery, the speed and specificity of the fact check, the visible pause, the reframe that declined to engage with the documentation, and the story it told was clear and complete. The reaction from media critics was sharper and more substantive than these viral political moments typically produce, because what had been captured was not simply a politician winning an exchange with a media commentator. It was a specific and visible demonstration of the mechanics of a media method that has operated very successfully for a very long time, partly because it usually does not encounter the kind of response that makes those mechanics visible. Carlson's approach to mockery as argument works when the mockery lands without being fact-checked, when the claim embedded in the caricature is not immediately and specifically contradicted by documented evidence, when the performance of contempt can proceed without the performance being interrupted by the precise, verifiable reality it is misrepresenting. When all of those conditions are met, as they usually are, because most targets of this kind of mockery are either not prepared to respond at this level of specificity or are not given a platform from which to do so, the method is highly effective. When those conditions are not met, when the target is prepared with specific documentation and delivers a fact check so instant that it freezes the studio before the mockery has finished reverberating, the same mechanics that make the method effective become visible as mechanics. The audience can see the claim, they can see the fact check, they can see the pause, they can see the reframe. And they can see, with a clarity that the method usually successfully prevents, the gap between the confident dismissiveness of the performance and the accuracy of the factual foundation it was built upon. Conservative media commentators who occupy the same ecosystem as Carlson found themselves navigating a difficult position in the aftermath of the clip's spread. The loyalty that defines these communities means that direct acknowledgement of the specific factual problem the fact check had identified was uncommon. But the more thoughtful observers within that community noted, with varying degrees of directness, that the exchange had not produced the outcome that Carlson's approach typically produces, that something had been different about this target and this response, and that the difference was worth understanding. What was different, as those observers noted, and as anyone who watched the clip could see, was the preparation. Not the rhetorical skill, not the political positioning, not the partisan alignment, the preparation. The specific, documented, verifiable preparation that had allowed a fact check to arrive so instantly and so completely that the studio had no time to absorb it before it was already on the record. For Crockett, the moment extended the pattern that has been defining her public presence across a remarkable range of settings and opponents. She has now delivered decisive, composed, documented responses to challenges from a sitting Speaker of the House, a Vice President, one of the most prominent figures in the orbit of the federal government, one of the Senate's most credentialed legal minds, a former state attorney general, one of the most practiced media commentators in the conservative ecosystem, and now one of the most watched figures in all of American political media. Across every one of those settings, the essential elements of her approach have remained consistent. The preparation that goes deeper than the surface of the expected challenge, the composure that does not vary with the stakes or the visibility of the moment, the precision that targets foundations rather than surfaces, and the patience that waits for exactly the right moment to deploy what has been prepared. That consistency, accumulated across that range of opponents and settings, is no longer something that can be explained by favorable circumstances or fortunate timing. It is a methodology, fully visible in its results and entirely legible in its execution to anyone who has watched it operate across enough examples to see the pattern clearly. The mockery that Tucker Carlson delivered was a version of something he has delivered successfully many times before. The fact check that followed it was a version of something Crockett has delivered successfully across a year of the most high-profile congressional and media exchanges the current political moment has produced. The difference between them, in that studio on that day, was not platform or audience or experience or confidence. It was preparation. And preparation, when it is real and when it is deployed with precision and composure, produces moments that freeze studios and circulate across every platform within minutes. Because what people are watching when they watch those moments is not performance. It is accountability. It is the documented record meeting the confident misrepresentation of it, in public, in real time, with nowhere to go and no revision available after the fact. Tucker Carlson mocked Jasmine Crockett. He did it with the tools he has spent decades perfecting, in the setting he controls, in front of the audience that has made him one of the most powerful figures in conservative media. Her instant fact-check froze the studio, not because it was the loudest response, not because it was the most dramatic, but because it was the most accurate and the most specific and the most immediately and completely documented. And accuracy, delivered with that kind of speed and that kind of composure, turns out to be something that even the most practiced mockery does not have a clean answer for. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, do two things right now: hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. We are going to keep bringing you the moments that reveal something true about power, preparation, and what happens when the two meet in a setting where the record cannot be revised, and the cameras are already running. The next story is already on its way. You do not want to miss it.